having made sure that the pistons now move evenly with each other, it's time to clean the rest of the bits of the caliper that came out. So first thing we're going to clean off is the brake pad retaining spring pin, or the split pin. So what I tend to do is, again, a bit of brake cleaner, just a little bit, not too much, and just take all of the grease and that was on there, and any dirt that was on there as well, just so it's got a nice nice surface to sort of be on. And also as well, I always re-grease these bolts, the caliper, always give them a good grease, just because obviously, you know, you don't want them getting seized in and things like that. Neither do you want them coming loose, so be careful how much you put on. You know, normally caliper bolts torque up to about between sort of 25 and 30 newton meters. That's just obviously a rough guide. Do make sure you check your Haynes manual or your workshop manual, depending on what kind of manual you do have. Doesn't usually have it in the owner's manual, so I wouldn't bother wasting your time looking in there, because this is a little bit beyond your sort of daily maintenance schedule. Okay, so when that's good to go, back to the pads as well. Obviously now I grease the backs of the pads because obviously they are going to be sat on the metal, so I grease the backing plates with copper grease, just because it can take the heat, and it stops the pads from sort of welding themselves to the pistons, because that is not fun. Not that they should literally weld themselves, but you know, they can form a nasty sort of rust between them too, so it's just a good opportunity to sort of see to it. Now obviously on the back of this particular one, you can see that the pistons have already made marks where they sit, nice little circles there, and on this one it's on the outer, so there's a lip there and there, there's a line in the middle there, just where it rests in against the middle of the caliper. So again, just for a second, I'm going to pop these down on the floor with the backing plates side up. Get some kitchen roll as well, because in a minute we're going to grease the back of those. I want to make sure that I can pop them again, backing plate side up, without sort of bringing up a load of crap from the ground as well. I'm just going to give them a dab of copper grease there on that one, and there, and there. Okay, that's the points where that particular brake pad makes contact with the caliper. And then on this one, the circle just there, circle just there, and again now onto my nice clean toilet paper. Same again with the caliper bolts, just nice little gentle pasting over those, put them back on the tray. And what I tend to do with this one as well, while I've got the copper grease out, that's what it looks like. It smells weirdly, don't know, the old copper grease I used to have kind of smelled a little bit chocolatey, but never mind. Anyway, moving on. Yeah, so and then with this pin here, obviously a light coating up here. Now what you can't see, and it's very difficult to show you, and I'm not going to try on the film because it's going to look appalling if this video doesn't already, so I do apologise. It's only sort of very relatively new to this kind of thing. The end of this retaining pin actually sits into the caliper, so what I tend to do is just dob it into the thing and get a nice bit of grease on there, just so that when it goes in, it won't collect any nasty little bits, and sort of weld itself to the inside of the caliper as well, because it's something on Suzuki Bandits, particularly if you have a Suzuki Bandit, these kind of pins, because they don't have any threads, unlike some calipers, they'll have a thread, so there'll be a threaded head to them, which means they can just wind out, a bit like my Suzuki GSR, which I'll do a change of cleaning out on another time as well. But these ones that don't have that tend to get stuck, which is a really good reason why you should grease them as well, because once they get stuck, you then have to go down the route of heating up your caliper with a blowtorch and not damaging the seals to get them out. And I've had a situation on a Suzuki Bandit where even splitting the caliper, which means literally separating it in two, so then I had to replace the O-ring seal inside the caliper just to get those pins out, and do you know what, they actually snapped level with the caliper. So in the end I ended up having to buy a new rear caliper because couldn't drill them out. So yeah, really important, especially with these split pins that don't wind out, to make sure that they are cleaned and greased regularly. Otherwise you could get them stuck, and they are an absolute pain to get out. What should be a sort of 20-minute, half an hour job becomes about 2 or 3 hours. So yeah, so those are all done now. So basically it's now going to be reassemble the caliper. Okay, so reassembly time. Just to be aware, I actually pushed this back a little bit on the slider. So what I'm going to do is give this just a little bit of a grease as well, because this is where one of the brake pads actually sits onto, so this bit up here. And also I'm just going to make sure that that is sliding nicely. There we go, so that slides out a bit, because that actually helps maintain and retain the inner pad as well. So basically it's just building this in reverse. So on this pad there is only one hole, so this will be where the retaining clip goes in, which slides into there and sits inside the caliper here. So that goes in that way around like that. And you may have to push down on this anti-rattle shim inside just to get the pad to sit in the caliper nicely. So it's a bit springy, you might even be able to hear it, but that's fine because it's supposed to be. And the idea is you want it to sit behind this, there's like a metal bit here. You just want that to, the edge of this pad to sit on that there, okay? So keep that retained in. So then I tend to put my thumb just there, and then for the other one, obviously 2 holes on this one. So one's going to be the retainer for the pin, and one's going to be the actual bit for sliding on over here. So on like that, and just down like that, and that slots in. And there's a nice big gap there between the 2 brake pads there. So again, that is sat on that bar there, and the other one is maintained behind that stopper. Okay, so with that in mind, retaining pin in through the bottom. So I'm just going to slide my hands, I do apologise for this. So retaining pin here, in through here like so, sliding in. Now bearing in mind as well, because we've now got grease on our gloves, we're potentially going to need that 5mm again, or the pliers, just to rotate this. The reason is because there is actually a hole for that R-clip, as it's called, and I don't know if you can see it, probably can't see it from there, sorry about this guys. There's a hole just in there where the R-clip sits. So taking my R-clip now, and you want to seat the long leg, straight leg, in through that hole, which is just there. So actually, if you can see where the R-clip is sat, I haven't pushed it in, but the idea is you can just see where the R-clip is supposed to be sitting. And the long leg goes through that hole, and you just push. Now, if there is some resistance, don't force it, because there's actually a metal ridge that runs in there. So if it's not going in, there is a chance that you're actually forcing it into that metal ridge, and when you'll bend the R-clip. So don't force that R-clip if it's not going. Just accept that it's not going and have another look. Next thing to do, obviously, keep the pads spread nice and widely apart, and make sure that the friction material sits either side of the disc. And then support the brake caliper and what I tend to do is just wait until that grips a little bit. So pinch it up by hand, just so that you're not allowing the caliper to dangle or hold too much weight on one bolt, because you don't want to strip and damage the threads. Now, this is where I would normally say use a torque wrench to tighten them up to about 30 Newton meters, 25 to 30 Newton meters for these. I tend to just go, you know, I can sort of judge it, so I sort of just tighten it up. But set your torque wrench, if you've got one, to sort of 25 or 30 Newton meters, depending on your owner's manual. One final thing, of course, you've obviously loosened the pressure off the brakes. So just remember at the end to pump the lever until you get good pressure there in the system, okay? And then literally repeat for the other side. God, I didn't realise how hard it was filming that. Seems easy when you think about it, but when you come to actually film it in practice, there's all the lighting to think about. So I do apologise. You know, maybe do another one again at some point when I get a bit more light. I've had my son to look after this morning, so it's kind of been a bit late in the day, really. Lost the best of the weather. If you do have any questions at all, feel free to drop me a message and let me know. Obviously, you know, working on the other side, what I would recommend is when you're actually doing the pumping the fluid back, turn the handlebars to the full, you know, fully into the tank on this particular lock, full right lock. The reason being is because the reservoir otherwise at this angle will be potentially spilling out fluid down here. So, you know, there's going to be more fluid in the furthermost line, obviously, because it has to travel further. So just bear that in mind. But it's the same procedure for taking the calipers apart and taking them off. And then at the end of it, obviously make sure you pressurize the system by squeezing the brakes again. And don't, of course, forget to tighten up the top reservoir screws. But that little trick, and I'll prove it to you now, there is actually a small amount of brake fluid that's drips off. I don't know if you can see it, just underneath the reservoir. So it does happen. And the thing is, what happens is a lot of people will forget that the brake fluid level is actually there to tell you what your pad condition is in terms of wear. You know, if it drops when the bike's standing up, if it's dropped to the lower level, your brake pads definitely need changing. I would put a provisory out, and I will, because I should have mentioned it at the beginning, but I will put a warning out. For those of you who are riding bikes whereby the brake pads have a warning mechanism, or they have something that tells you your brake pads are getting low, and I will put this in the description of the video as well. Do not try this. The way that system works, especially like on Ducatis and stuff, is they have a sensor inside behind the pistons within the caliper, and the idea is that as the level of the pad wears down, that piston and the sensor travel, so that when it gets to a certain level, it lets you know that your pads are wearing low. Now, you need to reset that sensor before doing this job, because it will not reset itself, and you therefore need an OBD reader to plug in to actually reset that. If you don't, and you try and push the pistons back, you will snap the sensor, and because they are obviously solid metal calipers, you will have to buy a new caliper. So if your bike has a system which tells you that your brake pads are running low, do not just go ahead and push the pistons back. Take it to a dealership and get them to reset the pistons and do it for you, or find a way, if there is an OBD reader, that you can reset your piston sensors back, because as I say, obviously a lot of bikes, especially the cheaper end bikes, don't have that system, but for those that do, that will be an issue, and you will snap the sensor off, because it will just push the piston straight into the sensor and snap it clean off. Better late than never, I guess, with that one. But yeah, no, honestly, any questions at all, do feel free. I will be looking at doing the rear caliper at some point. The rear caliper is pretty much the same on the Versys. The only difference is it's one single piston. It's one piston. It's different size bolts on the rear, and of course the reservoir itself is under the seat. So instead of having the reservoir on top of the handlebars for it, it's under the seat. I'm sure most of you know that. Obviously always use .4 brake fluid, if you're looking to change fluid and top it up, but we'll obviously go through that in the other video. And please also do bear in mind the brake fluid needs to be changed every 2 years, because it basically is hygroscopic, or hydroscopic I should say, which basically means it can it's water phobia, but after a time it can, overheating and cooling from usage, it'll get to a point where water can actually bond with it, and therefore you get brake fade and then eventually brake failure. So just be aware of that. If your brake fluid is 2 years old since you've last changed it, make sure you change it before you go out riding this summer, because it will need doing. But I will be doing one on my partner's Suzuki Gladius, so we'll do a bleeding system on that, and I'll show you the 2 ways that I know how to bleed a brake system. But until then, like I say, any questions, please put a comment in the video, and obviously stay safe. These are difficult times and things, so take care and stay safe. And I am actually being attacked by a gigantic bee right now, so I'm going to go.